Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And we'll skip down to verse 12. Blessed is a man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. You may be seated. Last week we dived into James. We got off to a hot start. We discussed the very challenging topic of having joy in the midst of trials. This is something that is really important, something we cannot do on our own. We need the help of God, the Holy Spirit, to enable us to be able to do that. Joy, again, is not necessarily happiness. It's inner spiritual contentment. It's being okay with it because the Lord is working something out that is good for us. The best example we can look at for this topic is Jesus himself in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 2 through 4. It says, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. And so what Jesus was able to do, the reason why he was able to face his trials, and remember, Jesus did not cheat. And so you may look at Jesus and say, well, he was God, so of course he faced his trials better than I do. But Jesus did not cheat. He did not tap into his divine abilities. He only did that for the benefit of others. He did not do that for the benefit of himself. He faced his trials as man. Now, he was fully God at the same time, but he faced them as we would. So he felt the full brunt of those challenges. And the reason why Jesus had the joy is, number one, he trusted the Father's plan. He trusted what God had put in front of him to do. Number two, he depended on the Holy Spirit to help him just like we do. And number three, he looked beyond the trial. And so the short term, even though it was the most massive and incredibly hard trial that's ever been executed upon anybody that's ever lived, excuse me, he looked beyond that trial. And he was able to see the fruit that would come on the other side of it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to learn how to look past our trials, because there is something that comes from trials that is simply priceless. As we look at the testing of our faith, there are different ways that your faith can be tested. The primary means that our faith is tested is through trials. Remember, trials are circumstances in life that can become a solicitation to sin. And sin is anything from murder and theft all the way to simply relying upon yourself or relying upon this world to help you get through things. Trials test your faith. Faith is a grounded trust in Jesus as Lord. Faith is a gift of God. It's not something that we come up with on our own. It's not something that we can make any more of on our own. It comes from God, and it comes from hearing the Word of God. What faith does in the life of a believer is it produces obedience. It's basically saying, God, I trust you, so I'm going to follow your ways. I'm going to live the way that you told me to live, and I'm going to trust in you to enable me to do that. That's what faith does. So it would make sense that trials are the primary means of testing, since faith produces obedience. It's a trust saying, God, I love you, and I value your ways, and trials essentially are coming along the way to disrupt that. Any trial will be a solicitation to look outside of the Lord for trust, for dependency. It would be to break that trust, to put it in someone else or something else, to depend on something other than the Lord to provide. And this, in essence, is where all sin comes from. It's from looking to the world and looking to creation rather than the Creator to help us. If we look at the word testing in the original Greek, so this would be the original language of the New Testament. We do this sometimes. It helps us understand the sense and the context of the word, because the English definition doesn't always help us fully understand what the original author was saying. If we look at the original Greek word for testing is the word dokimion. Dokimion literally means to disprove or prove the validity of something. Okay? So trials test what? Your faith. And so what's happening is that your faith is being tested to see if it's real. Is what you say about Jesus and is what you say about your faith genuine, or is it not? The trial is going to prove or disprove what you're saying. I used to watch a show occasionally when I had nothing else to do called Pawn Stars, when recommended. This family had this pawn shop in Las Vegas, and it was always interesting to me to see these things that people would bring in to the pawn shop. Just really fascinating objects, and an autograph sign, baseball, as simple as that, all the way to cars. And what's even more interesting than seeing what they would bring in is sometimes the process by which they would use to test the authenticity of the object. So sometimes the individuals, they had seen so much, so many people, this is what they do for a living, they'd seen things so much, they'd be able to prove or disprove its validity right off the hand by just looking at it, observing it. But sometimes they had to call experts of the field. They had to bring people in. They had to send people out. They had to send the object off to have somebody that knew more about signatures and sports or a particular craft. They had to get expertise advice to be able to prove if something was real and a fake. And it was so interesting seeing some of the people walk in thinking they were going to walk out with $15,000 in their pocket, and they walk out with nothing because they find out that the baseball that was handed to them by their grandpa that was signed by Babe Ruth is actually a fake. And so I didn't get a personal enjoyment out of that, kind of. But it was always interesting to watch that sort of play out. But they were testing the validity. Is this object real? Is it genuine? And this is what trials do to our faith. You can say you have faith in the Lord and you trust in Him and you believe Him all you want. Is that actually true? And trials are going to test that. So why trials? Why do we go through them? This is one of the age-old questions people love to ask, to question God's character. Why do bad things happen? Well, Scripture gives us some reasons why trials happen. And the first one is to test the strength of our faith. Trials test a believer's faith. Is it real? Does it have value? Does it have depth? Is it usable for the kingdom? I mean, a faith that gets upset at God every time something bad happens is not a type of faith that is ready to preach the gospel to the nations. There's a lot of talk in the church today about destiny and purpose and your journey to greatness and the plan that God has for your life. And honestly, it bothers me quite a great deal. I believe it's today's modern prosperity movement. People have sort of kind of figured out that the whole message, give money to the church and more money will show up in your life. They've kind of figured out that that's sort of a scam. And so now what they've done is, hey, come to this church and subscribe to our ways, and we'll help you find that dream that God has put you in the driver's seat on. And it just sort of gets people right. Now, does God have a plan for our lives? Of course He does. He has a wonderful plan for our life that He has marked out since the beginning of time. He had a wonderful plan for Paul's life. He got his head cut off. He had a wonderful plan for Peter's life. He got crucified upside down. He had a wonderful plan for the author of this book's life, James. He got thrown off the top of the building and then stoned and hit in the head with a billy club. But it was still a wonderful plan. It didn't end great in terms of the world, but it was still a wonderful plan that was proclaiming the kingdom and advancing God's plan in this world. So, sir, God has a wonderful plan for your life, but that doesn't mean it's going to look all roses and it's going to look amazing. It doesn't look like the American dream, just put in Christian language. It is a wonderful plan, but we trust God, and that wonderful plan, I guarantee you, will include trials. Trials of various kind. And so I'm not sure what God has planned for all of us in this room. God knows. He's predestined it since the beginning of time. But I do know that He wants to use us, and He can't use someone that hasn't been tried. They're not tough. They don't have endurance. Their faith hasn't been tested. If a person has a genuine saving faith, It doesn't mean that they are perfect or that they will approach and face all of their trials perfectly, but it does mean that they will survive any trial that comes their way with their faith intact. Genuine saving faith comes from God. It cannot be destroyed. It can be tested, but it will always be victorious. So if a person is tested and they come out with their faith intact, then we know it's genuine because it's been put through the fire, it's been refined. But if a person comes outside of a trial and their faith is not intact, it's a good sign that the faith that they proclaimed to have was merely by the profession of their mouth and it wasn't real to begin with. When a person has an empty profession of faith, the fires of troubles and trials of this life will burn it up. It will not withstand the test of this world. But where there is true faith, it will lead the person to a deeper revelation of their own spiritual condition. And this is painful. How many of you, this has happened to you? A trial step in your life, and you realize maybe I wasn't as far along in my relationship with God as I thought I was. It knocked me off my track a little bit. But it is incredibly beneficial to be acutely aware of your own spiritual condition, no matter how bad that is, because it is the destroyer of self-righteousness and deception. Our hearts are inclined to deception. So what often happens, and we all do this, I do this all the time, I am inclined to be deceived at my own spiritual condition. I think I'm better off than what I really am. And then God comes along, brings a trial in my life. It provokes and it draws out something nasty in my heart. And then I'm like, wow, I am a pitiful, horrible sinner. I'm just being honest, right? And you look at myself and say, I need the Lord to help me fix this. And so, but that position, even though it doesn't feel good, man, it is sure great to know your spiritual condition because it pushes you to be reliant upon the Lord. And then you're not looking at yourself as self-righteous. Oh, I've got this, I'm doing pretty good right now. And you're sort of self-deceiving yourself into the idea that you can sustain your holiness on your own. And so it's very helpful for us to know our own spiritual condition. Trials is a great way to do that. God left Hezekiah alone to test him. 2 Chronicles 32:31. And so in the matter of the envoys of the princes of Babylon who had been sent to him to inquire about the sign that had been done in the land, God left him to himself in order to test him and to know all that was in his heart. So God is omniscient. That's a fancy theological term that means he knows everything. He knows what's in your heart better than what you do. All the hidden stuff that you're sort of either not aware of or denying that's there, he knows what's there. He doesn't need to test a human being to know what's in their heart. He tests a human being because he wants that human being to know what's in their heart. Okay? So the testing is for the sake of Hezekiah so that he will know what's in his own heart. And God will sometimes send you trials so that you know exactly what is on your own heart. Another thing that trials do is they humble us. We saw this example with the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:7. So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations. In other words, God was continually showing himself and giving him new revelation about the church and about the Lord himself. A thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. The Lord sometimes and often sends us trials to humble us, to keep us from becoming prideful. Sometimes people can question their life. Why didn't God give me more money? Why doesn't he give me the things that someone else has? Why am I stuck at this job and everyone else keeps getting promoted? Why does this illness or this pain always hit me and beset me? Why does it seem like I can never be healthy? Why do I have these struggles? Why are my kids struggling with this and that? Why do I have mental illness struggles? Why do I struggle with this temptation constantly? It seems like everyone else is getting by and they're not struggling this. Why is this besetting to me? The reason may be for some of us is that if we had all the things that we wanted and easy, then we would actually take those things and it would rot our soul. Maybe the Lord doesn't give me more things because I would become selfish and conceited. Maybe the Lord is keeping a thorn in my side like flesh to keep me humble, realizing I'm completely and utterly dependent upon Him. Now, people like to deliberate what was the thorn. We don't know. It doesn't matter. It's a picture and it's an example of how the Lord uses trials over the lifetime of a person to keep them humble. We all have some version of that thorn because we're all prone to pride. That's in the heart of every man. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Like, it's in the heart of every man. So that thorn is a way to keep us in check, keep us humble. Maybe the reason I don't have more things or more money or that job is because I would take it and I would spin it towards something that would corrupt my character. Another thing that trial does for us is it grounds our hope in heaven. There is something about the weariness of trials and problems over a lifetime that helps them look forward to their hope in heaven. Excuse me. Have you ever noticed that young people really hate the idea of dying? And if you ever bring up the topic of Jesus coming back, they get the same look on their faces, the same look that I gave. Oh man, I like the idea of Jesus coming back, but I'd really like to get married first, and I'd really like to buy my first car. I'd really like to buy my first house. I'd really like to accomplish all these things. I'd like to finish school, get into my career. And so they have this long laundry list of things that they'd really like to accomplish before going to heaven, even though, in short-term perspective, heaven's so much better than all those things, right? So I want to accomplish A, B, and C. So middle-aged people, they've sort of compromised just a little bit. I'm a little bit more okay with dying because I've accomplished some of those things. But I like to see my career to its fruition. Some of this retirement that I've saved up for, I like to actually live that out a little bit, maybe travel. So there's still some things of this world that I'm sort of clinging on to. But you meet someone that's elderly, that's been retired for a while, they don't care that much. Some of them have almost resigned. Yeah, it's going to happen at some point. I'm almost looking forward to it. So what causes this phenomena? Why would a young person cling on to this world? Why would an elderly person, why would they they're almost more looking forward to heaven than they are the days that they spend on earth? What causes this phenomena? Well, over the span of one's life, you could get really worn down by trials. Physically, you're not what you used to be. You're 20 years old. You can pop out of bed, no problem at all, probably on 4 hours of sleep. You can probably jam for 16 hours, not miss a beat, boom. Do a million things all day long and never be tired from it. But you're 90 years old and someone has to help you get out of bed, right? Because you're not physically what you used to be. In the trials of life, your body has worn down over time. You've worked your whole life. You've worked for the man. You've dealt with hurt and pain and disappointment and death. By the time you get to those to an older age, a lot of people around you have passed away, people that you knew. There's a sadness that grips your heart from that. And what happens is you begin to look beyond this world. And for those that have Jesus, they have eternal hope. And so the hope, it grounds our hope into heaven. Essentially, it gets easier to value heaven and devalue earth when we face trials. Because the trials remind us that this world is hard. It really has nothing to offer us. Getting married, getting house, these are good things, but at the end of the day, heaven is so much sweeter. And so trials really help us to ground our hope into heaven. Philippians 1, 23, 24, Paul finds himself as an older man being beat up every day and facing death himself. He finds himself in this same sort of quandary. I am hard-pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. In other words, God has not given me permission to resign from my responsibility here on earth. I'm still breathing, so I still have work to do. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And so there's this idea that really some of us, we probably shouldn't wait until we're 90 years old and we can't get out of bed anymore to look forward to heaven. We should begin that process now. And I know there's things that you want to do, and it's God's grace and His decision and His will, whether He allows us to walk that out or not. But at the end of the day, heaven is where our hope is, because that's where Jesus is. And that is our home. We are simply wandering nomads. We don't belong here. This world has nothing to offer us. We have moments of joy that the Lord has, but heaven is where our home is. And so trials really help us ground our hope in that. The other thing it does is trials reveal what we really love. The only responsibility given to a human by the Lord is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbors as yourself. And this is much more difficult than it seems. It's really the battle that we engage with every day, loving the Creator more than the creation. It is our largest struggle. It's the core of every trial, of every sin in our life, our inability to do this to perfection without the Lord's help. Temptation really is a solicitation to disregard our primary love for the Lord in exchange for the short-term pleasures of this world. And so when we face trials, our professed love for the Lord is challenged. In a sense, we can say that we love God, but the trial really brings to the surface and shows how much we really do. And so when a trial hits us and maybe we realize, oh man, maybe the love that I profess for the Lord isn't as deep as I thought it was. Again, this is a good thing. It reveals our spiritual condition, allows us to give us a point of reference to be able to work forward and grow from. And this isn't God sending up from heaven going, He says He loves me. He really doesn't love me as much as He does. I'm going to throw a trial His way. Oh, gotcha. This is not an I gotcha situation where He's trying to catch you in not loving Him. This is God showing us our own limitation for loving Him. I think some people think that they are fulfilling the two commandments, the two most important commandments really well. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. I think most people are saying, I'm doing a pretty good job at that. Love your neighbor yourself. I'm doing a pretty good job at that. The reality is, not one of us ever, for even a fraction of a second, did this to perfection. Only one did. His name is Jesus Christ. He came and He died in our place. And now He has His Holy Spirit, which helps us to grow in this. But not even for a fraction of a second of our life have we done this perfectly. Christ understands that. And so He's there to help us. He's there. He understands. He's molding us. And every day our love grows for Him. For those of you who have followed Jesus for a while, your love for Him now should be stronger than it was when you started out. Right? Your passion and your zeal when you first get saved may be exuberant, but it's not really grounded yet. And then over time, trials and testing grounds it, pulls it down into a more genuine, deeper love for the Lord. So we will always have limitations to our ability to love the Lord as we should, and God shows us our limitations so that we can be aware and we can grow in Him. Other thing that happens is trials increase our usability to the Lord. By growing through our trials, the Lord is able to use us a greater scale. A small child cannot drive or pilot a helicopter into the middle of the depths of the jungle and rescue a squad of soldiers. First of all, they can't even touch the pedals. I don't know if helicopters have pedals, but if they did, the child would not be able to touch them. So a child is not able to drive a helicopter in the midst of the jungle. It has to be an adult, a fully grown person. It has to be, but not just any adult. It has to be a person that is trained, that has a specific mindset to be able to have the capability, the personality, the makeup to be able to do a rescue mission like that. And on top of that, they have to be well trained. They have to go through all of this training to be able to know how to respond, what happens when things go wrong. I've got to get in there. I've got to do this thing a specific way. I've got to protect the soldiers in this specific way. What happens if the enemy shows up and how do I respond to that? All of these scenarios, a child doesn't get sent in to do this job, but a person that is seasoned and matured and has withstood the trials and the testings of all of the things that go into the process, this person, when become fully matured, now can be trusted to go in on this rescue mission. When you are tough and matured, Christ can use you at greater capacities. 2 Corinthians 12:10, for the sake of Christ, then I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecution, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. A lot of us, we would like to, out of a right intent and a right motivation, we'd love to do big things for God in our life. But you cannot go into these things without maturity and toughness and without being your faith being tested and tried. Hebrews 11:33 and 34, who through faith conquered kingdoms. This particular verse right here is referencing all of the heroes of the faith mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. All these people, Abraham, Noah, all these people that have went before us, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Most of this thing, these people did these things under the Lord's direction and power, but these people were a part of these things. I think we read this list and we're like, man, I would like to do some of these things. This would be really cool. I would like to be able to serve the kingdom at this level. But the problem is that most of us have a lot more endurance and toughness to be developed in our testing. And we can only gain that endurance and that toughness when we surpass, we go through trials, and we do it successfully with the Lord's help. Let's go on in verse 3. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. I want to look at the word for steadfastness, because steadfastness is the product of testing. When you get tested and you endure it, it produces steadfastness. So what is the word steadfastness in the original Greek? Hypomene. Hypomene means a patience and endurance, a remaining behind. Patiently enduring trials while trusting in the Lord develops hypomene, endurance, toughness, patience, steadfastness. The affliction is short term. Even if it lasts for life, it's still a short term in comparison to eternity. But the endurance, the steadfastness that comes as a product of your trial lasts forever. It's something that you will always have. What is important about this Greek word for steadfastness, hypomene, is it is not a passive endurance. It is aggressive. It is active. If I may quote the definition, the sense, it is active steadfastness in rather than passive submission to circumstances. It's staying power, it's consistency, it's discipline, it's stickability, it's persistence. It's showing up every day in your marriage, and your kids, and your life, and your calling. This is not a scenario, if you know a storm is coming. Hypomene is not the type of endurance where you go inside the home, board up your windows, and wait the storm out. Hypomene is you know the storm is coming and you have a mission to accomplish, so you get out your house and you push against the storm and you trust in the Lord even when the highest wind hits. You grab onto something and just hang on if you have to, but you continue pushing forward even though the storm is present. That's hypomene. That's steadfastness. Not going inside your house and boarding up your windows and just waiting until this thing passes. I'm going to give you a little hint here. If you go inside your house, board up the windows, and just wait for the storm to pass, you're going to be in there a long time because there's always a storm. This life is always going to be throwing something at you. So you're never going to move forward. You're never going to advance kingdom if you just board up your windows and try to wait for this storm to pass. You get out the house and you push the storm. You get out in it, and even if you just got to hang on to a telephone pole for a season because the winds are blowing so hard, you hang on to that telephone pole, and the minute that you can get grounded and you get your feet down, you get on your knees, you pray to the Lord, and you keep moving the ball down the court. My sports people, if the defense applies full court pressure, do you just hold the ball and stay back and let them have their way? No, you push back. You keep pushing the ball down the court. You find a way around it. You counteract. You use their aggressiveness against them. This is the enemy's plan, and this is what he would like to accomplish through the trials in our life. He wants you to go inside your house, board up your windows, get a little chair, sit down with a TV, and just wait out your storm. What gets accomplished in that? Nothing. He wants you to push the storm. The Lord wants you to push the storm. You're going to need strength to push forward and push against the storm of your life. Nehemiah 8:10, and do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. You're going to need strength to push the storm. No joy, no strength. What do people do when they have no strength? They board up their windows, wait out the storm. I'm going to take a passive approach. Strength is required to push the storm. Here's the catch. The storm may weaken at times, but it never stops. You're always going to have the storm. So push it. Get out. The joy of the Lord is your strength. I remember when COVID hit. You guys remember that thing? A lot of areas that hit the pause button, okay? Now, we as a church, we stopped having in-person services for a handful of weeks. A lot of stuff going on. We had no clue how bad this thing was, whatever. But when we resumed services a few weeks later, and we hit the ground running, well, sort of like there's this idea of being put on everything on pause. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to kind of, when people come to church, we're going to tell them how awesome they are and sort of coddle their sensitivities, and we're going to sort of like make them feel all nice and cozy inside. They need sort of that safe place. During COVID, we pulled out and destroyed our stage. We eliminated worship songs that were becoming toxic for our culture. We eliminated performance culture. We preached an entire series all summer long attacking the biggest lies of false doctrines in our country, in our world. I had so many people say, man, that is not in the book of what you do when you get trained to be a pastor. Like during times of great calamity and trouble, you want to do a lot of comforting things. You don't usually want to attack. My idea here is you either retreat or you push. Steadfastness is important, and sometimes there's a special grace for accomplishing forward movement in the middle of the storm's strongest winds. Sometimes there is a special grace that more gets accomplished when you're willing to not retreat but push forward, even when everyone else is crawling back into their houses and boarding up their windows. You got to stay in the storm and you got to push forward. Steadfastness becomes the hinge here between verse 3 and 4. And as we transition to verse 4, we'll get more clarification on steadfastness. It says, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So here's the hinge. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Full effect means that there's going to be times that you tire in your endurance. You're going to get sick of pushing against the storm. You're going to get worn out. But you can't give up. You just can't. This thing has to, and I mean has to, play out to the end. Your trial, whatever you're facing, your series of trial, your season of life, has to play out to the end with your faith intact. Persistence, moving forward, not giving up, not losing joy, staying the strong. Just keep going. Just keep pushing the storm, because there's people out there that you have been positioned since the beginning of time to preach the gospel to a lost world that needs to hear, and they're out there, not in your house with your boarded up windows. Just keep going. And here's why this is important for you. Matthew 24:13, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. Not the ones who give up in the middle of their trials and disassemble and deconstruct their faith, but the ones who endure to the end will be saved. A true saving faith endures until the end because it isn't your strength that's creating the endurance, it's God's. That's the joy. The joy of the Lord is my strength, an inner spiritual contentment that I trust God, that no matter how strong the storm is, I will stand and I will push the storm. I will not give up. True saving faith always endures because it's not up to the individual, it's up to God to see it through, and He has unlimited strength and power. That storm ain't scaring our God. It scares us, rightfully so. We're limited. But it doesn't scare Him. To the person that is righteous, not by God, but righteous only by themselves, they will storm out into that storm by themselves without God's help. And they may go for a little while, but they're going to expire in the middle of that storm. They're going to die. It's going to overcome them because it requires the strength of God to make it through this world with faith intact. And a person who is righteous by their own accord, who looks to themselves as the superhero, who looks to themselves as the hero of their own story, I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take over this storm, that person fails. Because we need God to get through this. They're going to tire out, they're going to give up, but God's kids don't. So when endurance has its full effect, meaning that it makes it to the end, then you are perfect and complete because you have ran the race set before you. 2 Timothy 4:7-8, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but to all those who have loved His appearing. What I love about this verse is it perfectly mirrors our final verse, verse 12. Blessed is a man who remains steadfast, who finishes his race under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love Him. The reward for pushing the storm, the reward for outlasting your trial with your faith intact is a crown of life. You live forever with the Savior and King, and you get to march in His parade, carrying His banner of victory, and you get to be with Him forever. That's the reward. And the crazy thing is, we didn't do anything to get to that point. It was God who enabled us to step out in the storm, to push it, to overcome our trials with our faith intact. God did all of the work. All we had to do is get on our knees and trust Him. And not in ourselves, and not in our money, and not in our kingdoms, and not in our legacy, and not in our family, and not in America, and not in this world, but in the Lord. That's all we have to do. And then we get a crown for that. How unfair. It almost feels like the final participation award. God did everything, but then He gives us the crown. Folks, this life is not easy. It's not. It's very difficult. And then if you choose to follow Jesus with a true, genuine, saving faith, what are you promised according to the Word? You're promised persecution. You're promised a storm. You're promised a pushback. I could coddle you and I could tell you what you want to hear. Life is grand, you're amazing, and God has great destiny for your life. But I'm going to tell you the truth. Life flat out sucks sometimes. We have a real strong enemy that wants to devour you. Trials will find you. They are hard. They are lasting. They are long, brutal trials. But if you will not give up, and if you'll get out your house, stop boarding up another window because your anxiety fools you and makes you think you just got one more window you need to board up. Oh, I just need to reinforce this wall a little bit. That's what anxiety does. It traps you inside your house and you can't go anywhere. Get out the storm. Trust in the Lord. Get on your knees. Pray. And push the dang storm. Because there's people out in that storm that are dying. They don't have the hope you have. They die. They don't have Jesus. They're going to hell. Push the storm. And if you will push the storm and get through this trial that is this life with your faith intact, crown of life. That's a pretty darn good deal, folks. That we get the credit that only Jesus deserves just simply because we hung on to the telephone pole in the middle of the hurricane and trust in the Lord to help us endure. We did nothing and we get all the credit for it. That's a God that's not just because of, he's worthy to be worshiped just because of who he is, but because of what he's done, how graceful he is. So my friends, I'm not discounting your trials. I'm sure there's many of you going through some really significant trials. But know that it's producing in you, if you will let it, you can cower. And listen, if you've been cowering, here's you realize your spiritual condition, you push forward now. Get out your house, push the storm. Some of you are going through some tough trials. It's making you tough. It's building you up. Because the storms aren't going to stop coming, and the need for people to know about Jesus isn't going to stop in your lifetime. Push the storm, folks. Do it. Get on the other side of this trial with your faith intact. Father, we thank you.